I'm 28 years old now, but this is the first time I've thought about this incident in detail in quite a while because of how traumatizing it was to me. I met my ex-girlfriend in California in 2010. We had both lived there our entire lives, but decided to move to Maine a couple of years after we'd started dating. She had flown to Maine on a business trip in 2012 and fell in love with everything about it. The small towns, the fantastic scenery, and of course, the people. She came home and convinced me to pack up our bags and move there, so we did so. We saved up a bunch of money and rented a huge moving truck. The plan was for me to drive the truck across the country, while she stayed behind 3 days to finish up her classes at the local community college, which were due to end around that time. I would have just waited until her classes were already finished, but we decided to take advantage of an incredibly good deal we were offered from the company, who provided the moving truck. She had a car, so she would be able to drive there anyways, while I towed my car behind the moving truck. My brother came with me on the trip. The drive was obviously going to be a very long one. When my brother and I arrived in Maine, about 4 days after we had left, we were completely exhausted. After unloading the truck and sleeping for about 16 hours, we decided to visit the small town of Belfast, which was about 14 miles away from the new house. We ate some good seafood at a little family-owned joint, rented a scary movie, and made the drive back. My new house was literally right in the middle of nowhere. During the day, the view of the lake in my backyard was amazing. The woods surrounding my house were awesome, and everything was completely beautiful. At night, the house was incredibly creepy to be in though. The whole house had windows completely surrounding it, so you could not see anything looking outside. I'm sure if you were standing outside of them, you could quite easily see in though. My brother had a flight booked back to California the following day. We woke up very early in the morning to drive down to Portland where the airport was. I eventually made it back alone and wasn't able to make any phone calls or watch any cable TV because we had no service out there and no cable or internet hooked up yet. My cell phone didn't work anywhere on that property. I had plenty of DVDs to watch, but that was about it. When I made it back, I decided to try out my new fishing pole we had just bought in town instead. I wasn't out at the lake very long, as it started to get dark in Maine fairly quickly in autumn. I went back to the house and sat down in the living room. I was in a chair looking out the windows at the scenery. The view was getting darker and darker as I turned on all the lights in the house. I quickly became creeped out at just how pitch black it became outside. Imagine being in the middle of the forest, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, looking around. You couldn't even see your own hand if you held it in front of your face. That's how pitch black it was. You could not see anything. I hadn't hung up any curtains or blinds yet either, and had the extremely uneasy feeling now that someone was outside my house, watching me. Like they were following me room to room, and if someone were out there, they could very easily do just that. I decided to quickly hang some sheets up all over the windows, using some thumbtacks. I sat on the couch in the living room and put on a comedy movie to try and shake that unnerving feeling I had. It did not work at all. Eventually, I tried to get some sleep instead. I had a lot of work to do the next day already, and my eyelids were quickly becoming sore. I was starting to actually get very tired. I covered myself up with some blankets on the couch and turned off the TV. After a few minutes, my eyes had adjusted, and I could see around the living room very slightly. My eyes were very heavy, and I fell asleep soon after. I woke up some time later. I could tell it was still in the middle of the night because of how dark it was. I reached for my bottle of Coke on the ground in front of me and took a big sip. I set it back down and looked around the room. Now, I'm having difficulty putting these next emotions into words that I can accurately convey to you. My heart began to throb immediately when I noticed the figure of a man standing in the corner of the room. He was staring at me, I felt as if I was going to die right there from fright. I did nothing and said nothing, not by choice, but because I couldn't. I was completely frozen. The man didn't move. I was able to rethink logically for a moment. I'm not sure the man knew I had seen him or was looking right at him. I did have a blanket over me, which might have shrouded me from view and shadowed me, in which case he wouldn't be able to see my eyes. After about a minute of gut-wrenching fear, I decided I had to do something. This was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. I coughed. Of course, not a real cough. I did it while getting up in an effort to give this person the impression I didn't know they were there. I slowly made my way to my feet and walked across the icy cold wood flooring to the bathroom, around the corner of the living room. The figure did not move. I made it to the bathroom, and nothing happened still. I closed the bathroom door and slowly turned the lock to the upright position. Tears went down my face as I backed into the bathtub behind me. I was staring at the door. I suddenly realized there was a small window above the bathtub that I could most likely crawl out through. I moved the shower curtain and reached up to the window. I unlocked it and tried sliding it to the left to open it. The window began to squeak when I pulled it, and I froze, hoping the man hadn't just heard that. Unfortunately, I then began to hear a tapping on the bathroom door. Not a knock, but a gentle tapping. It didn't sound like the tap of fingers either. It sounded like metal, like they were tapping a knife against the door. At this point, I made the realization that the man either knew what I was doing or simply wanted me to know he was outside the door now. Adrenaline took over completely, and I slid the window open, pushed the screen out onto the ground, and tried not to make any noise as I jumped up and began squeezing through the window. My head and upper body were out, and I could not see inside the bathroom, only the dense dark woods in front of me. I was just pulling my legs out through the window when I felt something grab my foot. Directly after that, before I could even react, I felt my ankle suddenly sliced open. I let out a noise of shock and surprise as I pulled out of his grasp and fell to the ground. I started heaving, and it felt as if my heart would explode. I stood up and looked around. I quickly dashed out into the woods and fell to the ground, looking back at the house and the window to the bathroom. I felt the area of my leg on my ankle, which was throbbing from pain now. I brought my hand up only to reveal it was covered in blood. The deathly serious situation I was in became real and horrifying. I looked back at the house and saw the back door fly open. The man started gazing around in the darkness surrounding me, clearly searching for me. I became as still as a statue on the ground and tried to control my breathing. He had a big knife in his right hand and was wearing all black. He walked down the patio steps and started walking out into the woods, nowhere near where I was laying, fortunately. He was grunting, and soon after I lost sight of him. I started frantically looking around, worrying that he would spot me at any moment and stab me to death. I saw nothing but trees and darkness. There was a bit of snow on the ground from a couple of days before. I was freezing and shaking at this point. About 10 minutes later, I saw the man walk out of the trees from where he had entered and go back into the house. I laid out there for the rest of the night. Luckily, the sun started to rise only about an hour later. After the sun fully illuminated my surroundings, I felt as though the man had probably left, and I felt ready to move again. I rose to my feet and walked around the house to the front. I saw the front door was now open completely. I approached it and peered inside. Nothing. I walked in a few steps and gently grabbed my car keys that were hanging on a hook by the door. I ran back to the car and unlocked it. I got inside and started the engine and backed out of the long driveway. I drove to the little general store a few miles from my house. This is where the story ends. I got away, and so did my visitor. My ankle was cut up pretty bad, but healed just fine after a few months with no problems. I did suffer some minor pneumonia from being outside for a time, but it was nothing too serious. I later found out that not long after, an elderly man that lived about 2 miles down the road from me was murdered in his bedroom in the middle of the night. This experience took its toll on me and my girlfriend's relationship, and I ended up moving back to California after just a few months. The incident made it very difficult to sleep, but writing this has oddly made me feel somewhat drowsy. I think maybe I'll attempt to go to sleep right now. Thanks for listening. This happened to me 8 years ago, when I was 30 years old. I had just rented a new house with my family in a very nice neighborhood. We had just moved in about a month before I experienced this. I was in the habit of walking my dog every day at 6 p.m. as soon as I got home from work. I would take her out and we would always walk the exact same route as well. One day, we had just started walking when we passed by a neighbor's home and then witnessed something we did not expect. As we were passing by their driveway, I glanced at the front door, which for some reason was wide open. There was a man talking to two women, but he was crying uncontrollably. I felt very embarrassed, as you can imagine. I walked by and saw one of the two women making eye contact with me. I looked away, but I could still easily hear the man sobbing and cursing. He was clearly very upset about something, but I couldn't hear what the two women were saying at all, nor any sound from them whatsoever. Of course, I kept on walking with my dog. Soon after, I forgot all about that incident. Then, a few days later, I got home from work quite late, around 8 p.m. or so. As I was turning into my driveway, I saw there were police cars and fire trucks everywhere, as well as an ambulance parked outside of this house. I immediately thought back to the other day and thought for sure it must have been connected to what was going on right now. I pulled into my driveway and went into my home. My wife was cooking dinner and my kid was playing some games. I wanted to walk by and get a better look at what had happened. My wife said she had no idea either. Something was clearly going on here though. I quickly grabbed my dog and went outside for our walk. As we were walking by the house, I saw several people crowded around it. It looked almost like a scene from a movie or a TV show. I stopped for a moment and just watched a man that was walking back to his police cruiser. He spotted me and approached me. He actually questioned me a bit as well. I told him I was just living a few doors down and I was concerned about what was going on. We spoke for a little while, and when I actually came to ask him what had happened, he told me something I will never forget. He said that one of the women that lived there had been brutally assaulted and murdered, whilst the other one had been left in critical condition in the hospital. The officer clearly saw I was shocked by this news and asked me to quickly be on my way. Before I left though, I made sure to tell him what I had witnessed just a few days earlier. He told me not to worry, as they had now detained the man who'd done this. He himself had confessed apparently. I resumed the walk in total disbelief. My wife was in equal shock when I told her after I returned home. I later saw on TV a picture of the woman who had been killed. It was undeniably one of the same women who I'd seen that day, talking to that man. The news said she had been killed by her ex-boyfriend, and that her friend who survived had nearly been beaten to death as well. They eventually showed the man's picture, and I felt a bit sick when I saw it was the same guy, crying and sobbing that day. This happened on Halloween night. It happened years ago in Wine County of California. Myself and two roommates lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-story house. Early in the evening, everything was pretty normal. We passed out candy to trick-or-treaters, hung out together, watched a scary movie, and overall we're having a pretty great time. There's always a certain feeling of creepiness that comes with Halloween night though, especially if you just stay at home. You never really think something sinister or something terrifying will happen after all the candy was gone and all the kids disappeared. Our movie was nearing its end, and we had all drunk some wine. We were getting very sleepy, around midnight or so we decided to call it a night and go to our separate rooms to go to sleep. I slept in the bedroom on the first floor, while my 2 roommates had the 2 bedrooms upstairs. At about 1 a.m. though, I awoke to some strange noise, accompanied by an ominous feeling. I got out of bed and stood in my dark bedroom, listening for the noise that had initially awoken me. For a moment, I thought maybe there had been no noise at all, and I had simply been having a dream or something, and gotten out of bed for no reason. It took a few moments, but then I heard a muffled scream coming from upstairs. I heard scuffling and commotion coming from up there as well. I was extremely scared at this point, and I decided I had to go see what was happening. In a situation like this, in reality, selfishness often takes over. You really just want to hide or escape and be safe. But still, I opened my bedroom door and took 3 steps out of my room. The stairs were only a few feet away from my bedroom. Just as I had taken those initial steps, I heard somebody coming down the hall at the top of the stairs. They were coming down fast, and they were coming right towards me too. It was pitch black, and having only a second to decide my next action, I quickly but silently moved to the back sliding glass door and slid it open. While doing this, I felt as if somebody was going to grab me from behind, but none of that happened. I tiptoed backward into the bushes in my backyard while staring at the back door. I expected somebody to walk out at any moment and see me hiding there, but nobody did so. I waited for about 3 minutes. I'd say I was terrified of what had just happened in the house, what was still happening. I didn't want to go back in. Then though, the faces of my 2 roommates popped into my mind. I had recalled earlier that night, drinking with them and having fun. I realized if they were in trouble, I needed to be brave and go back inside to help them. I slowly walked back toward the door and crept back inside. I immediately heard screaming. It sounded like it was being muffled by blood. I heard gurgling noises. My heart was beating out of my chest as I climbed the stairs, unsure if somebody was still in the house or if they had left already. I came to my first roommate's bedroom and turned on the light. A very surreal feeling of "this cannot be happening" swept over me. I gazed at both of my roommates lying on the bed. One was silent, one was groaning in pain. There was blood all over the room. I didn't know what to do. One of them was making noises, and the other was very clearly already dead. I stepped into the room and almost slipped in the pool of blood that was on the ground. I tried to speak, but nothing would come out. I was in shock. I snatched my roommate's phone off her nightstand and dialed 911. I felt as if the intruder was still in the house and was going to approach me from behind. I kept turning around to check, but saw nothing. I told the operator I needed an ambulance immediately and that my friends were currently dying. Ambulances and police were at my house in only a few moments. My friend that was groaning died before the police even arrived. I never saw the intruder. For some reason, he skipped my bedroom that night and instead went upstairs to murder both of my friends instead. So one night, I got a knock at my door. My boyfriend was at work at the time, and I was not expecting company, especially not so late at night. I turned my music down for a moment, and that's when I realized the door was not locked. Instantly, I was terrified. I'm only 4'10", so I had to prop myself up the wall to look through the peephole and carefully lock the door while doing so. The knocking turned into furious pounding. As I looked outside, the man outside the door was no one that I recognized. He looked quite disgruntled, dirty, and frightening as well. He was short and stocky, and clearly furious. He grew even more frustrated, knowing I had just turned my music down. He must have heard me lock the door. He started calling out to me through it. "Ma'am! Excuse me, ma'am!" Only, how the fuck did he know I was a woman? This was a guy I had never seen before, and he hadn't caught a glimpse of me either. I looked around the room, only to see I'd left my blinds open. I realized he must have been watching me vacuum the entire time. Thankfully, at this moment, My neighbors right across from me opened their doors. The husband called out to the man, "Excuse me, who are you? What are you doing here?" Startled, the creep fumbled backwards. "Oh, good evening, sir. I was just going to offer my carpet cleaning services to her." Obviously, the husband was very suspicious. "Well, that's great and all, but you need to leave right now." The creep ran off right away. Afterwards, I called the police, my boyfriend, and closed up my blinds. I texted the neighbors and thanked them profusely for scaring the man away. I paid extra to live on the top floor, but it seems this creep had been watching me from down below.